Our next guest is Howard Blumenthal and his colleagues presenting his current main project, Kids on Earth. Howard and I are cooperating for not really a decade, but at least 8 years, if I remember correctly. And we are both somehow geographers. I'm doing it at the university, and he's doing it in the world of media. One of his most popular productions is Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? And the project of the Kids on Earth is linked to that. He's asking young people, kids, around the planet how they are seeing the world, and especially also how they are seeing their education. And that's quite an incredible path he is following, and that ended up, for the moment, in a very, very important book he's certainly going to talk about. Howard, looking forward to listening to you and to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, and say hello as well to Clarie, who will join me in a minute, and Pearl, whose name I don't see yet, but Pearl, if you're there, wave to us. Um, so, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. Let me give a very brief background. I come from television and media. I've written a newspaper column for the New York Times Syndicate for about 100 papers. I've written about 25 books. I've produced a lot of television programs and been an executive and all that. But the thing that's been the most fun has been interviewing kids all over the world. I've interviewed in about 30 countries so far. Anybody who wants me to set up interviews in your country, let's talk about that. And you'll understand why in a minute. So there's me. Clary, do you want to just sort of briefly explain who you are and how you got involved in all of this?
Yes, Howard, maybe you give me like 5 minutes. Just go ahead and then I'll come within
Okay,
5 minutes.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Yep, we're dealing with internet issues and electricity issues, and this is a forum about Africa, so most of you understand why. So we'll go from there. In fact, I started the Kids on Earth project in Uganda, in Kampala and that area. And we did that in part because a friend was running an NGO, beginning to make some television productions there for children. And I wanted to ask kids about their lives. I had been to several middle schools, lower high school, um, in the Philadelphia area, and that's what they asked for. They just asked me to go all over the world and ask kids what their lives were like. So I did, because I do what the kids tell me to do. Um, so began the process of interviewing, and what I found very quickly is that one-on-one interviews were the best, that they would be honest with me because I was sort of a caring stranger, which is an odd role, but that worked. We recorded the interviews, so there are almost 900 of them up online on Vimeo. And I'll give you websites. I think you have a website behind me anyway. Um, so what we know, well, they're they're pretty confident about their own lives. They're pretty confident that they like to learn. They're not wild about school, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they have a pretty clear picture of where they want to end up in the future. So the key is what does that future look like? It's uncertain for all of us. Nobody knows what we're going to be doing in the next 10 minutes, no less what we're going to be doing in 2035. But there's a lot of information we do know. And if you're a student of UNESCO reports and all of that, and talk to a lot of people about this, you can actually gather a lot of information about where the world is going, apart from politics, which is always unpredictable. And knowing that, I started focusing on learning. How do humans learn? What do we learn? Who decides what gets learned? Who decides what doesn't get learned? Um, and and also because school is closely related to learning, although certainly isn't the way most people learn. Most people learn on their own, not through school, through their lives, because we spend so little time in school in a lifetime. Um, I really focused on where is school in this combination. And I was able to do that because I didn't write the book alone. I wrote it with the former dean, then the dean of the University of Virginia School of Education in the United States, one of the larger schools of ed. So beside me and in partnership, we had a very solid, I'm going to advocate for kids, but there's somebody next to me who knows a whole lot more about education than I ever will. Um, so that's Bob Pianta, and together we wrote and wrote and wrote, and we ended up at Harvard University Press. So they're the publisher, which is quite an accomplishment, I think. I mean, it's sort of amazing that these ideas that we lay out are are blessed in some ways by Harvard. So what are we blessing? Well, a whole lot of international collaboration, a whole lot of understanding school in progress, not only in big countries, but in smaller ones, and not only in Europe, but in Africa and Asia and on from there. So what we found is that, well, the biggest concerns is that kids who have the internet can now decide what they want to learn. So there's a lot of variety in what they decide to learn and why they learn it. Um, the flip of that is if you don't have internet, you fall so far behind so quickly that we've created a global inequality system that we're not likely to correct unless we get the third or so of people without internet, again, many in Africa, um, to have the necessary reliable electricity and internet to be able to learn what they need to learn. So as we look at Africa, as we try to figure out what help is necessary, what help is welcome, what help is not welcome, um, I'm sorry, I have an incoming call. Um, all of that um, really needs to be considered through the lens of what is the role of each of us as we look at different parts of the world and try to make some sense of it. So with that, I see that Pearl and Clarie have both joined. So we'll do a little conversation between the three of us. But first, I think you probably want to get to know them a bit. They're delightful people. We've discovered one another as a result of these various adventures. So, Clarie, can you give us just a minute on kind of who you are, where you are, and what you think about? And then we'll talk more about that in detail later.
Thank you, Howard. Riding on already established protocol, my name is Clarie Odhiambo. I'm joining in from Siaya, Kenya, and the current president, Rotary Club of Siaya. I'm an educationist, and I run a few projects here in Kenya. One is about solar installations in schools so that we can have 24/7 power supply. I also collaborated with World Bank, and we constructed a library in Siaya called Siaya Community Library that supports children from destitute areas and from the community. They can get access to books and read. And also, in my solar installation system, with this is called Greenovex, is called Evolve Ecosystem Innovation in partnership with Roberts and Share Technologies. And this was to give youth that empowerment and also the community, because when there is energy, there is life, and clean energy, it entails a lot. And if it originates from the community themselves, sustainability is something that is covered. And I want to say that we will interact more, and that's the brief of who I am. Thank you. Back to you, Howard.
Very good. Thank you. And we will get to know one another individually as well. So Pearl, you're there. I see you there. Okay. Can you join us on video as well?
Hello, everyone. My name is Pearl Utuk. I'm the Chief Executive of Teach the Child Initiative based in Nigeria. I also lead a network of young leaders um, who we are training to become the next generation of African leaders at the African Leadership Academy in South Africa. What we do at Teach the Child is use education technology known as talking books and pens that have been digitized in local languages, local Nigerian languages, in order to increase literacy across public schools in Nigeria. We began in Abuja, and we have since gained traction ever since our inception in 2020. I met Howard in 2022 while on the Mandela Washington Fellowship. Howard was my focus group coach. Um, while we were, while I was essentially strengthening the idea that was to be implemented in Nigeria. At the time, I had been trained in College of William and Mary, as well as University of Virginia. We've gained partnerships with several national governments to facilitate the work they were doing in Nigeria, such as the government of Denmark, as well as South Africa. So we have received massive support for the work that we're doing here. And we are more concerned with the depth of our work as opposed to the breadth of it. What this means is that we're not as motivated by the numbers as we are by the level of impact that we have on the beneficiaries that we work with. So it's not our target to to reach 10,000 students in 2 years. That is not what we work with. And partners that demand that of us, we clearly know that those are not the partners that we're working with, because it's not enough for us to cite numbers. It's what we're looking for is meaningful, very measurable impacts that we can very significantly track over time, over a period of time between like 1 to 2 years. And so far, since inception, we've reached about close to 1,000 children in Nigeria. When I mean children, not just children in schools, because we've also worked with children within the communities. That was in the year 2020 during the COVID lockdown. Um, and I can very confidently say that there has been long-lasting impact of the project that we're doing. We're seeing children actually begin to be drivers of their own learning, because they've been taught now how to learn, as opposed to the conventional school system that teaches them what to learn, that just dishes out modules. Children are then now taught how to tailor their reading material to their own natural styles. Yeah, Howard asked for a brief introduction, and I gave you a whole paper.
That's okay. We'll adjust time as we go. So, so listening to the two of you, um, the future is bright. You seem to have a very good handle in local communities and countries, et cetera, about what to do. But there are a lot of kids who are being born in Africa. Half of the kids born in the next 25 years will be born in Africa. And the more I read, learn, talk to people, um, the more concerned I become, because we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have thousands of you, Pearl, or you, Clarie, that are working hard on this. We've got the emergence of that, but we're still at the beginning of it, of that confidence. So when I go into a US classroom or a British classroom or in India, almost anywhere else, and I start talking about what do you know about Africa? And I usually start with the teacher, and the teacher doesn't know a lot because it's just not part of the curriculum. It's not part of the old style. We'll base the curriculum on the US, we'll base the curriculum on the UK. So when I ask, for example, how many countries are in Africa? Name them. If I do that in an African classroom, I get 20, 30, 40 of the 54 countries, I think. I mean, I may not be perfect. Yeah, good. But when I ask here, I get three. I get Egypt, South America, maybe something they heard on the news. Nigeria, quite likely, if the U.S. continues with its immigration thrust and immigration, will be the third largest country on earth, and the U.S. will be fourth. So there's a lot happening, but we're not seeing it. So, and when I begin to think about the cultures, so we've created these countries, but the countries aren't necessarily reflective of the people who live there. There are many native peoples who, unlike in the U.S., continue to thrive in large numbers. So there's a culture um, that's present, but I'm not sure that the infrastructure and all of that so many people, the largest or second largest continent on Earth, in all of its various parts, how do we think about infrastructure, reliable electricity, access to the internet, equipment that works, the role of television and radio and media, the role of school? How do we get enough teachers who not only are physically present, but who show up every day for work because there's means to get there, because a rainstorm doesn't take out the road, or or in a lot of schools there's a corrugated roof, metal, too loud. You can't really teach in a room like that. Uh, so how do we begin to think about that? And then how do the kids who are in school begin to think about earning a living? Because the economy is not where it needs to be in many places, not everywhere. But there's a good number of countries, maybe half, somebody else would know that better, who are operating at a large enough deficit and don't really see a way to crawl out. I should mention with a big asterisk that U.S. also is operating with a very large deficit, and that 1 in 8 people in the United States rely upon federal assistance for food. And right now we're in the middle of a government shutdown, so we know those numbers pretty clearly. So this is not a Africa problem that we have to solve for the world. It's a world problem, and it would be good if we could figure out how to solve it everywhere. But people probably should have enough food to eat and should probably have access to the internet and reliable electricity and affordable housing and all of that. Um, but the situation varies from rural, urban, small cities, large cities. And you guys, the two of you are very different places. So you might want to talk about that a bit. So the question is, does that ultimately, if we're on a path where accelerated growth is very necessary, how do we not replicate a Europe or a United States, but allow Africa to be Africa in all of its glory, in all of its wonder? And how do we make sure that the kids who live there aren't either leaving or being passed by the kids in the rest of the world? Um, so how do we do this? And if it's okay with you, Clarie and Pearl, I'm going to jump to those big questions first. So
It's okay with me, and I think African problems can be solved by Africans themselves. And when we allow them to unleash their hidden potential by providing the necessary equipment that they need and the environment that they need to flourish in, we can say that we will solve African problems the African way, because they have their cultures, we have our cultures, and we have our traditions, that core values that knit us together. And I think when we balance economic, social, and environmental needs within African concept, within the community, not in the urban centers, we are going to make it happen, because we are tackling the problem from the grassroots where it needs that support. When we look at the teachers, we find that most of the teachers are not well equipped to handle the CBC curriculum that we have. The policies that the government has put in place are not enabling that kind of training to happen. So we need to have strategies, we need to have policies that govern what is learned in school. And apart from that, we need to interview the learners themselves at the community level and realize what is it that you need. And I think in my company, Evolve Ecosystem, I took my time to ask the students, what is it that you'd love change in your curriculum? And they told me that if you're talking about environment, you cannot talk about it from the perspective of the COP28, COP29. Come down at the community, tell us why we need to plant trees, tell us why we need to do agriculture, and let us learn practically. Let us plant trees practically, let us go to the farm practically, and know the produce come from the farm. Because when you ask them, where do we find milk from? They say from the shop. Yet we have cows at home and they don't know that we milk the cow. So let's have actions from Africans themselves at the grassroots level. Number two, let's promote intergenerational responsibility. I'm speaking from my own experience. When I was growing up, my grandma had to teach me agriculture and the need to conserve the environment. And I grew up knowing that this is what is good to do and it's worth doing. If you come to Siaya today, you will find that within 3 months, I have championed through Evolve Ecosystem and Rotary Club of Siaya. We have planted 7,431 trees, and I have assigned teachers and students to make sure that they are nurtured and they grow. And I keep monitoring with a system that tells me they are watered, they are growing, it's happening. And this include fruit seedlings, and they are done by students in schools and colleges, and also students at the community, students from less privileged areas like the single parents. They don't much take keen interest on their children. So these are the children that are captured within this pact. Then I look at a bigger concept in the whole country. You have a conference, you need to connect with OWAD in the US and you are in Siaya. There is no electricity. So this drives me to start solar power installation system such that when electricity is not there, because it can be like that, you can be in the power side for a whole month and you can't work, you can't move, you're in the darkness, you can't read, you can't do your homework, you are just there. And that's what motivated me to start Evolve Ecosystem Innovation and Robert and Shasha, so that we can have solar installed in schools, in business enterprises, in hospital, to have a 24/7 economy. And this is the engine that runs businesses, because the county government will want to collect revenue. And how will you collect revenue if there was no activity, there was no trade? Why? Because there was no power. So that's what took me there. And this is done with students, and then they graduate and they get funds to go back to school and continue learning so that they can be better people in the society. And this is done after you have identified the challenge in your community. Then when you go to school, you do engineering, install solar, and have energy that lasts and have a complete circle of economy. Back to you, Howard. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I want to come back to the book for a second. So The question that we ask in the book Kids on Earth, and these are questions that kids have raised, and then we as academic scholars, whatever, have added in plain language. So how do we even think about this? And there's a few answers. One, the current version of school isn't working. It's not doing the things that Clarie is talking about. It's just not necessary to put kids through 12 years of traditional subjects from the 1940s. It doesn't help. Um, the kids have a pretty good sense of what they want to learn, and they're pretty good at articulating it, but every kid is not the same. Every kid has their own life plan, has their own circumstance, has their own problems. So to treat everybody as if everybody has to learn the same things in the same ways is a little crazy. So what we suggest instead in the book is a structure for the school day, still have schools, still have teachers, but far less reliance upon old school curriculum, far more reliance on learning about your body, your mind, your life, other countries and cultures. And again, my interest in this country may not be your interest in that country or culture. How do we work together on the planet? Those are subjects that I think I could get behind, and it seems as though kids can as well all over the world. The idea of doing math and social studies and civics and all that, it has its place, but it shouldn't dominate the school day. There are just more important things to learn um, in this part of the 21st century, and particularly in an economic situation where there's so many different skills that are necessary. But you have to start at the beginning, and the beginning is in many ways just making sure that learning can take place in ways that make sense. So, Pearl, I'm going to ask you to go ahead for a couple of minutes, and then I want to close it out. We have to be out at the top of the hour. So just leave me a minute at the end, if you would. Pearl,
I can hear you, Howard. First, how many minutes do I have?
about two.
Okay. And what is your question?
Just add to what, uh, how do we do this? What do you, like, how do you see this world, and how do we help? Or should we stay on the sidelines?
Well, I have quite what's it now? It's quite controversial standpoint for right. And that is that, and I'm going to begin with politics and then go into education. I don't believe that in Africa, democracy is the way to go. And democracy, and I'm very willing to be convinced otherwise. But the thing is, democracy was adopted from the West, hook, line, sinker,
Yeah.
right? And we're seeing various, agitations across the continent because it does not work. It is foreign to us, to our traditional systems. And so there are protests in Cameroon, there are protests in Kenya, there are protests in the just concluded election in Tanzania, and where everyone is very skeptical of what's going to happen in Uganda. I mean, what's going to happen in Uganda in the next couple of months, right? And I mentioned politics, right? Because that's pretty much where we find ourselves with our education system. We are not at, and I would like to call for like a hard reset. I know it's a very difficult ask, but African nations need to, grind to a halt and do like press the reset button. What are our needs as developing nations, right? What do we need for our development? What do our curriculums currently look like? Admittedly, they are Western curriculums that do not necessarily speak to our needs as societies, which is why, largely speaking, students that cannot keep up with that pace because it's far removed. The examples in the textbooks are far removed from their realities. They are not interested. Performance in schools are really low. That is one of the things that it's because of this copy and paste that our educational systems are doing. It's not speaking to the realities of our environment, right? So I'd ask that African nations, and civil society truly agitate for African nations to, or African governments to sit down, like press the reset button and actually assess the needs of their respective countries, and then develop a curriculum that speaks to the realities as they are. That way, when once they speak to the realities, children opening these books are better able to connect, relate with the examples therein, with the scenarios that are used in our English or mathematics, and they're better able a position to engage with the material and thus learn, and thus their learning would then in the future, in 10, 15, 20 years, positively impact our economies. And then, it's a give and take. So that would be my one contribution. One of the things that we at Teach the Child are facilitating and are supporting teachers in schools that we work with to do is to be very deliberate about incorporating play into their teaching method, right? It's difficult. It's very foreign to them, and they don't necessarily get the support that they need from governments to do this, which is where independent influence from independent actors, such as civil society, and also like international actors, comes into play. We have to keep, encouraging the system, because, the more we contribute, at least we hope that over time, all of our contributions would make a mighty ocean, as the poem goes, and contribute meaningfully to positive development. Back to you, Howard.
I wish you could come to the United States again and give a bunch of speeches, because what you want to do there, I want you to do here too. It's the ideas that you're expressing, the ideas, many of them, we share and are reflected in the Kids on Earth book. The material is so irrelevant. The kids are so separated from it. And it's so disheartening to hear that you're having the same problems that we're having. Like, we should all be having different problems because we're all different places with different people. And yet we've all bought into this old school way of learning, an old school way of school that just doesn't work anywhere. So please come back. I mean, because these are the discussions we need to be having. And it's so difficult for people to see, oh, these are our problems too. But unless we have conferences like this, we don't know that, because we don't talk about it. So Pearl, Clarie, thank you so much for doing this. We could certainly go on for a lot longer. Benno, I did my best to get out 3 minutes late, not so bad. But if anybody has any questions for any of us, we're here.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, all, for this very inspiring session. I think all what I know about the book is a big challenge for the educational systems around the planet. They all have been introduced in the end of the 19th, early 20th century, and we are living now on the 21st century. We really need to rethink our idea of school and curricula. The Club of Rome is one of your supporters. We had this session today with the Club of Rome, and also other contributions were questioning the current educational system. So I think we really have to rethink a lot of things like that. Thank you very much for your contribution. Looking forward to continue to working with you, Howard. Thank you very much.